Well, take your Bibles and open up with me to the book of Daniel. Chapter 4 is where we'll be this morning. Daniel chapter 4. And if you're using that teacher guide, I encourage you to pick that up and follow along with us in that. Make a point for notes there. If you don't have one of those and you're wondering where to get one, grab one at the Welcome Center when you pull out this morning. We are talking in Daniel chapter 4, and just maybe set the context here a little bit again. When we think of Daniel, we think of stories like Daniel in the lion's den. We think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We think of the believers who were in the story. And yet, the book of Daniel is also about these others, particularly the pagan kings that were there, and their interaction with the God, the living God of the Bible. And so one of the things you immediately see is they kind of like are a cultural norm for us because you see their pride show up. And I recognize that's a word that probably needs a little bit of clarification as we talk about the dangers of pride. We say as parents to our kids, when they do something right, we say, "I am so, finish it for me." Proud of you, that's right. We love it when we're at work and an employer comes up to us and says, "Man, that was a great job. I am so proud of you." If you're playing on a soccer team or a football team or something and someone comes up to you and says, "Man, great game. I'm so proud of you." And so we immediately feel kind of like that word pride seemingly has some good meanings as well. But what I want you to see is in the scripture, it's always referred to in a spiritual stumbling block kind of way. In fact, maybe C.S. Lewis gives us a greatest understanding of it. When he says, as long as you are proud, you cannot know God. A proud man is always looking down on a thing and people. And of course, as long as you are looking down, you cannot see something or someone that is above you. When we have a prideful spirit within ourselves, and someone isn't commending us, but we're actually feeling that way in ourselves, we're standing in judgment of everybody else that's around. That's like Lewis says in Mere Christianity, we're looking down. And because of that, we forget that there is one who is above us. Now I'm going to pick up the reading in Daniel chapter 4. This whole chapter is about King Nebuchadnezzar and his prideful spirit and how God lovingly disciplines him to break him of that spirit. So I'm just going to read for you the first 3 verses. Here we go. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Now, at that stage, you might be saying, well, it sounds like Nebuchadnezzar's got it together. He's worshiping the true and living God. That's how this chapter starts, and it's also how this chapter will end, which you'll see next week. But in between, it reveals Nebuchadnezzar's pride. And so that's going to give us our first understanding. When pride comes, we often fluctuate between what I'm going to call reality and elevated self-importance. When pride comes, when we become prideful, we often fluctuate between reality and elevated self-importance. In verse 3, he's got an understanding of reality because he talks about God and who God is. And that allows him to see himself properly. But if you get over to verse 30, you see he makes it all about himself. And this is a great reminder that if you're kind of tossed to and fro, if you're kind of get it right half the time, you're worshiping God half the time, and the other part of the time you kind of think it's about you, okay, then I just want to remind you then that's where you're starting to see pride revealed in your life. We often fluctuate between reality and what I call elevated self-importance. Let me show you that in verse 2 and 3. It seemed good to me, he said, to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. There he understands that whatever is good in him came about as a result of God working. But look at verse 3. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. Now, that verse is the perfect reality verse. Okay. Now, let me just stop. When I use the word reality, and if I were to say reality and you fill in the blank, what's the number one answer? Reality TV. That's exactly right, okay? Let me tell you something about reality TV. Nothing is real in reality TV, okay? I'm sorry to burst your bubble there, okay? But if you thought, but I really love this show and it's so real, okay? No, it's not real, okay? There's cameras, there's directors, there's actors. They're saying, listen, can you act? Okay, you can be in our reality TV show. Okay, it's not real, right? What I want you to see is this is how we get to reality. Not by looking to demonstrate something or impress somebody else, but this is how we stay in touch with reality. One verse. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is everlasting, his dominion endures from generation to generation. When I am struggling with pride, I got to come back to what I'm going to call three things out of this verse, okay? Here they are. Number one, God is great and I am weak. That's right. God is great and I am weak. God is great and I am weak. You see that, don't you? When he uses the word multiple times in verse 3, how great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. Earlier he says, to show me the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. God is great and I am weak. If you are struggling because you're thinking, well, I'm pretty important, okay, you just need to hit pause on that and say, okay, how can I reflect the greatness of God? I just need to stop and think about the greatness of God. This morning, I was up early, which is typically a Sunday morning for me, and I was out on our front porch, and as the sun was starting to come through, I just said to God, your trees are on fire. Like the colors were unbelievable. And I was just sitting there thinking, I can't begin to do anything like this, okay? I can't begin to change the seasons. I can't begin to say, I do well to try to get my thermostat set right in my house, okay? I don't control things like that, but God has this incredible way of bringing about all of that. Maybe it's one of Satan's temptations for us in our pride is to keep us so busy thinking about ourselves that we just don't pause and concentrate on the greatness of God. You just need to do it. You just need to step outside and look at something that is bigger than you and say, my God made that, right? He is great, and that greatness allows me to say, I am weak. Here's the second idea. God is eternal and my life is short. God is eternal and my life is short. Notice what Nebuchadnezzar says. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. I love that. He's a king. He has a kingdom. He recognizes his kingdom's going to die when he dies. The king, probably at this stage in the civilized world, at Nebuchadnezzar's time, he was probably the greatest king. He's the greatest person in all the earth presently, and yet he acknowledges when he's thinking realistically that his kingdom is short-lived, but God's is everlasting. God is eternal and my life is short. Wherever you are in your life, you just need to realize how quick and fast your life is going. I had a moment this morning when we were meeting for prayer up here with the worship team and with the tech crew and the other pastors were here. And we circled up and I stepped back and took a picture because I realized, okay, this is humbling, that I was the oldest guy in the group. Okay. That's right, it just struck me like everybody here is young. Like I can even do the math and add up 3 of the guys who are here and that's still not gonna reach my age, okay? Like there was just this moment for me where I thought, wow, life is so short. Like how did I pass all those years? Okay. Here's what I want to remind you of. If you think your life is important, you need to pause and remember how short your life is and that only God is eternal. Here's the last one. God is in control and I lack control. God is in control and I lack control. There's a great reminder here in this verse. He says, and his dominion, that is God's, endures from generation to generation. It's a great word, this word dominion. It's a Chaldean word that sounds like sultan. Like that sounds like that Indian guy who's in charge, right? So you kind of get this picture that's it. It's a dominion kind of word. And it actually speaks of an empire. Like, think about this. Nebuchadnezzar would have thought of himself as being the king of all of the empire. He thought of it as his empire. But what he is saying is God is over an empire that's way bigger than my empire. His empire, his dominion exists from generation to generation. And you're going to see this in a moment. The sovereignty of God and how we understand that God is in control should cause us to realize that we are not in control. Right? Now remember, I said, when pride is in play, we often fluctuate between reality. This is reality. God is great. God is eternal. God is in control. I am weak. Life is short. I lack control. Okay. All of those things are reminders of what reality looks like. But look at how Nebuchadnezzar looks at himself in Daniel chapter 4, verse 30. There we read, and the king answered and said, is not this great Babylon, my empire, my kingdom, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty? Okay. Now, just let me tell you something. If I and my are showing up in your vocabulary, okay, you got a pride problem. Okay, it's that simple. If you find that I and my are showing up in your vocabulary, you have a pride problem. I have a friend of mine, perhaps you've heard me share it before, who teaches counseling down in Houston, Texas. And my friend has often shared with me one of his first assignments for counselors is he said, here's your first assignment. You have to go, when he's teaching his undergraduate students, you have to go the entire day without talking about yourself. That's right. You can only talk about yourself if someone asks you a question. You cannot introduce yourself. You cannot use the word I or my in a sentence the entire day, and you got to keep track of it. And he said, it's really remarkable when they come back and students, I say, how was that assignment? And they say, that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be, right? Because we are prone to use these words, I, my. Look how Nebuchadnezzar uses them. I have built by my mighty power. This is something I have done for the glory of my majesty. And you'll see next week that immediately God says, enough is enough. And here comes the discipline because you made it all about you and not about me. Now, I want to just take a quick zip off to a whole different discussion, okay? So we're going to put Daniel 4 on hold for just a moment. And I want to introduce you to these words that keep showing up in the Bible. The words are, I will, okay? Just say this with me, I will. Say it one more time. Okay, so you can almost hear in that the fact that you and I have the power to do something. So I want to introduce you to 7 I wills, 5 I wills, and 3 I wills, okay? This is just a quick tangent to demonstrate how quickly we make it about us. Here's the 7 I wills. Back in the book of Exodus, when God takes the Israelites out of Egypt and transports them up into the promised land, which is going to take a process, here is what we read. Exodus chapter 6, verse 6. God says, say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, with great acts of judgment, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. 7 I wills. God says, these are the things I'm going to do. Notice that for the Israelites coming out of Egypt, coming out from underneath slavery, God's the one who's doing it. Right? God's the one who's doing it, and God's the one who's taking credit because he's the one who did it. I've been reading through the book of Ezekiel in my personal time with the Lord, and all of a sudden the other day, I just started underlining all the times God says, I will do this. And I thought, wow, I think I found all of them. I found like 30 of them. I found 30 I wills. God said, I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this, and I will do this. And then I Googled it, how many I wills are there in the book of Ezekiel? And it said there are over 200, okay? And then I said, I just wonder how many times I will, God saying I will occurs in the Bible. And there were thousands. Right? It is God who does these things, not you and I. Right? We have a responsibility, I get that. But we do not claim accomplishment, or else we know that we're kind of like where Nebuchadnezzar is. We're fluctuating between pride and humility. God gets the credit because he's the one who does them. Now, let me give you the 5 I wills, okay? In the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, we find 5 I wills. And again, some have referenced this as satanic I wills. These are the 5 ideas that Satan uses because Jesus reflects back on one of these passages and talks about Satan falling from heaven. So we hear that, but it clearly in the context is speaking about the king of Babylon. So here is Nebuchadnezzar, the greatest king of Babylon. Maybe it's referencing him, but either way, it's satanic. But here's the I wills, okay? Look at these I wills and hear the difference. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of the assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Okay. You hear it, don't you? I will do all these things for myself. So you got 7 I wills, that's God saying he will do it. We got these I wills, no, I'm gonna lift myself up over God. Right? And then I started thinking, where else do I hear I wills? And there's 3 I wills given by Jesus. And going a little further, he fell on his face and prayed, saying, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. Again, for the second time, he went away and prayed, my Father, let this cannot pass unless I drink it. Your will be done. In verse 44, he went and prayed for the 3rd time, saying the same words again. What are the words? Not as I will, but as you will. The point is this, that when we think of pride, one of the quickest ways to step away from it is to start to say, what is it that God wants from me? That is what I will do. I will surrender my will to his. So this is just a great reminder, something Nebuchadnezzar was unwilling to do. He made it about him, not about God. Let me go back to that Daniel chapter 4 for a moment. Let me show you something else. When it comes to pride, we find that prosperity is harder to live with than poverty. Okay. When it comes to pride, we find that prosperity is harder to live with than poverty. I recognize in my own life when things are going well, when there isn't pressure, when there isn't difficulty, when it's a week where there was more than enough money to manage the events, when that's happening, it's harder for me not to take the credit for it in some way than when suddenly things are more difficult. And I want to show you that in verse 4. For there Nebuchadnezzar sets the context. He says, I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. Now, the word at ease is actually the word we get Selah from. And sometimes when you're reading the Psalms, you see the word Selah. It actually means a pause or a rest. We were doing that this morning. You may not have realized it. There were Selah moments in the song, in the music as we were playing it. When Ozzy's playing and just the instruments are playing and Justin's playing, but there's no voices. That's what the psalmist had as a Selah moment. So when you're reading the Psalms, their hymn book, and you see Selah, it was kind of like a pause. Think about this, okay? Whenever that happens for me, whenever we're doing a Selah moment in a worship song, I immediately just look at the lyrics that are there and rehearse them in my head. Like, this is my moment to think more deeply about what's going on here. Selah is the word that's used here when I was at ease. It means that we're at rest, okay? We're just taking a break from what we were doing. It had the tendency to mean everything is safe and secure, okay? Everything is safe and secure. And when my life is like that, okay, it's easy for me to kind of be at ease in my house, not worry about things. In fact, that's how Nebuchadnezzar looks at it. He says everything is safe and secure. It kind of sounds like, the parable Jesus told about the rich man who had built, had gained all this wealth. And so he said, what am I going to do? I'm going to build bigger barns so that I can store my wealth. And I'll say to my soul, basically, be at ease. You have more than enough laid up for you. And Jesus said, but he didn't understand that God said to him, this night your soul will be required of you. We feel comfortable and at ease when the things in our life are kind of together, okay? I just want to remind you, that's a place where we're vulnerable to pride. He goes on to say, I was prospering, which is the idea of flourishing. It means not only was I at ease, but I was prospering. I had more than enough. And if that's your condition, I just want to remind you, that's a dangerous place to be. You say, no, it's not dangerous, it's safe. That's why I've saved my money. That's why I'm secure. That's why I have these things. That's why I paid off all my debts. That's why I'm where I am. I just want to remind you again that that is a position where it's easy to say, I've done. It's not the position you want to be in. In fact, Fulton Sheen says it this way, humility is dependence on God as pride is independence of him. The humble soul is always the thankful soul. So if God has granted you the ability to have it all together, to be at ease in your house, okay, just make sure you're being thankful. Make sure you're saying, Lord, this isn't from me, this is from you, and I am grateful. And if your life is challenging, stop grumbling and complaining about it, right? You do understand in the grumbling and complaining, you're saying, Lord, I don't like what you've granted to me, as opposed to saying, Lord, I am thankful for what you've granted to me. One is humility, one is pride. Here's the third idea. We know that God in his grace gives us ample warnings, okay? When it comes to pride, we know that God in his grace gives us ample warnings. Now, Nebuchadnezzar gets a dream, okay? He has this dream. He says, I saw a dream that made me afraid. Oh, wait a minute. Nebuchadnezzar, I thought you had it all together. I thought you were at ease in your house. I thought everything was prospering. And all it took to mess you up was a dream? Okay. That's right. He said, I saw a dream that made me afraid. And as I lay in bed, the fancies and the visions of my head alarmed me. There were certain things God was, the true and living God, was placing into a pagan king's mind that bothered him. Just think about that for a second. He spent his entire life building his kingdom. And God says, snap, just like that, I'm going to make you afraid with just a dream. And in this dream, God is warning him of the dangers of his pride. Now, I want to pick up the reading. I'm going to just read for you the dream, okay? So here it is. I'll pick up the reading at verse 6. So I made a decree that all the wise men of Babylon should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. And then the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me, he who was named Belteshazzar after the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And I told him the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar. Okay, now remember, that's Daniel's pagan name that they've named him. His real name is Daniel. Chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you and that no mystery is too difficult for you. Tell me the visions of my dream that I saw in their interpretation. The visions in my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. And the tree grew and became strong. And its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, and its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it, and the birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Okay, all of that's good. My life is great, my life is flourishing. Look at verse 13. I saw in the visions in my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. And he proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beast flee from under it and the birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots on the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Now, notice it kind of changed the language here. Let his portion be with the beast of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. Now here's the dream, and a simple interpretation, because Daniel makes the interpretation for him. He says, Nebuchadnezzar, you're the tree. Okay. God has grown you to be this tree that manages and oversees a massive kingdom, a massive kingdom. But the thing is, because you're prideful, God's going to take from you that kingdom, and he's going to chop you off at the trunk. He's going to chop you off. Now he's going to band you with iron and bronze, because eventually he's going to hold your kingdom together, and eventually he will restore to your kingdom after 7 sevens. It's the idea of it could be 7 months or 7 years, but it's a period of time. And in the meantime, you're going to eat grass like the animals. Okay. You say, well, what is that? That's a mental condition where someone has a mental breakdown and actually perceives that they're like an animal, and you can't talk them out of it, right? And all of a sudden, here's this man who had everything, and everything is taken from him. Now, the thing is Daniel says, listen, repent. Don't be prideful. Don't be prideful. Just come to God. Walk in humility, and perhaps that wouldn't happen. But pride is like that, right? Pride just wants to keep saying I and my and me and mine. Pride just wants to keep talking about us. And eventually, what you'll see next week, is that's what will happen to Nebuchadnezzar. Here's what I want you to see now. Okay? God not only gave Nebuchadnezzar warnings, God gives you and me warnings. And the scripture is just full of these warnings. I'll just give you a handful of them out of Proverbs, okay? When pride comes, then comes disgrace, but with the humble is wisdom. How about this one, Proverbs 15:33. The fear of the Lord is destruction in wisdom, and humility comes before honor. Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. Proverbs 29:23. Pride ends in humiliation, while humility brings honor. The point is this, that as you read through the scriptures, you see over and over again that God is not only gave Nebuchadnezzar warnings, God is giving you and I warnings. Pride ends in humiliation, while humility brings honor. When it comes to pride, two more thoughts. When it comes to pride, we believe that the sovereignty of God is the great equalizer. When it comes to pride, we believe that the sovereignty of God is the great equalizer. Now remember, we started this passage by talking about the fact that God is the one whose dominion, his rule endures from generation to generation. We can't even control ourselves, let alone the world around us for any period of time. But look at verse 17 in Daniel chapter 4. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know, here it comes, that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will and sets over it the lowliest of men. I love that. That's Daniel saying to Nebuchadnezzar, listen, can I just tell you something? You thought you were the greatest? If God placed you there, he sometimes places the lowliest of men there to lead. The point is God in his sovereignty doesn't allow, he takes away the ability for someone to say, I've accomplished this, because only God could have brought it about. In fact, I can probably, in your own life, you can probably see that if there was any advancement in your life, whether it's career, whether it was school, whether it was in family, whatever advancement there was, if you were to pause and look at it the right way, you would say, well, yeah, I did work hard, but I knew in the end it really wasn't for me that it happened. God made connections. God had an appointment. God accomplished something. God awakened in me a desire. You would have to say that you saw that the Most High God had put you in the capacities that he put you in. And that's how you want to think about it. I love the way 1 Corinthians 4:7 captures the same idea. What do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? Right? Just read that verse with me, okay? So read it with me. I want you to hear it with your own voice, okay? Let's start at the beginning, 1 Corinthians 4:7. What do you have that God hasn't given you? And if everything you have is from God, why boast as though it were not a gift? It's a great question. We should not be boasting as if we earned it, because everything is a gift from God. One final thought when it comes to pride, here it is. We need the accountability of compassionate and truth-telling friends. We need the accountability of compassionate and truth-telling friends. Now, I don't know what all the other leaders that he brought in and all the other magicians that Nebuchadnezzar brought in told him, but I love the way not only that Daniel told him, but how he told him. In fact, we find that beginning at verse 17. Daniel says, this dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation. Because all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation, but you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Now, I'm thinking that maybe if I just read the dream, it wouldn't be hard for me to say, maybe the tree's you. Look, in the end you're destroyed. Okay. But all of the other leaders, if they saw that, were afraid to even tell him that. Right? But not Daniel. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. Why? Because he understood the dream. Right? The king answered and said to Belteshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. And Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you and its interpretation for your enemies. You can hear Daniel say, I really don't want to tell you the meaning of the dream. I don't want to tell you because it's about you. And it's going to take you places where you will be totally humiliated. You'll no longer be the great King Nebuchadnezzar. Something's going to happen to you. I want you to hear, as it were, what I call the accountability of a compassionate truth teller. Because Nebuchadnezzar says, well, tell me the meaning of the dream. And Daniel does. He says, this is it. You will no longer be this great king. You're going to be humiliated. Now, just for a moment, understand how difficult that message is to give. But Daniel tells it, And he tells it with what I call a sweet compassion. I wish it were for somebody else, but it's not. It's for you. Now, for just a moment, understand something. When it comes to our pride, what we really need are people who tell us the truth about ourselves. Okay. A number of years ago, you may have heard me tell a portion of the story, but you probably haven't heard the end of it. A portion of the story goes that I was having a conflict with someone at a job before I came to fellowship. And when I was having this conflict, I was encouraged to go talk to them. And I was listening to this Charles Stanley tape right before I went to see them. And Charles Stanley made this great case that after you receive criticism, 7 ways to receive criticism, he said the last thing you want to do is you want to ask the person, is there anything more? Okay. And so I went, I talked to this person. I can still remember where we were standing, and we were having this conversation. He started to unload the things that I had done that were wrong, just the two of us, right? And we're completely removed from everybody else. Nobody else is around. And I heard all of it, and I thought to myself, wow, that's a lot of stuff. And so I'm guessing that I can ask this Charles Stanley question because there can't be anything more, right? And so I said to him, is there anything more? And he paused, right? And I remember in my mind, I'm thinking, uh-oh, this is not good, right? And he said, well, Phil, since you ask. Right? And then he told me something. And Kim will tell you, I was devastated. Like I was spiraling down for who knows how many days. And it was like, I was just devastated. And so I went to a good friend of mine, not that this other person wasn't a friend, but a really good friend of mine. And I said to him, Brian, I need some help. This is what was said. Do you think it's true? And he paused. I remember thinking, that's not good either, okay? And he said, you know, Phil, I know you, but I also know that that could be the impression that was left. And all of a sudden, the same words were said from a compassionate truth teller. And I walked away saying, wow, I got things I got to work on. When we are prideful, we are defensive and pushing back at the truth tellers in our lives. And I get it. Sometimes they're compassionate, sometimes they're not. Okay? But the truly humble person isn't going to be concerned whether they're compassionate or not. They're going to say, I just want the truth. I want the truth. Like Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to say, tell me the meaning of the dream. Right? I need to know. I want to know. Don't just tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. Right? That's the mark of a humble person. And for those of us who have the responsibility, as each of us do, if you have a relationship, any kind of relationship, and I just mean a work relationship, a family relationship, a church relationship, if you have a relationship with someone, you have a responsibility to be also a compassionate truth teller. Can't back away from it. Daniel said, I wish it was for somebody else, but it's not, it's for you, and here's the meaning. Okay. We need the accountability of compassionate truth-telling friends. And if we don't have those, then we're going to struggle with pride. When it comes to pride, we all need that accountability. I love this in the Daniel story, because remember, Daniel is a slave. He's a servant of this pagan king. He was stripped from where his home was. As a child, he was taken from where his home was, and he's placed here in an entirely different environment. And Daniel's got to be, you know, as a slave, if he says something the king doesn't like, the king has the right to execute him. And yet you just feel in it a friendship, something between Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel that's different than a master-slave relationship. And I think, more than anything, it has to do with Daniel's ability to give wise counsel, truth-telling counsel to a king. And the king said, everybody's telling me what I want to hear, but only Daniel will tell me what I need to hear. In your guides, you'll notice there, the worship team's going to come, and we're going to close with a prayer time this morning. But I want to give you a couple of takeaways, okay? Today's takeaways, here they are. Think about God's greatness. Spend time daily rehearsing the attributes of God. If you struggle to say I, my, me, or mine too often, one of the best things you can do is to spend time rehearsing the attributes of God. Because as you do that, God becomes great in your eyes. He becomes who he is. And you become smaller. Just for one of the ways I've encouraged you to do this in the past is just go through the alphabet, A, B, C, D. Just walk through the alphabet and think about a quality of God. And as you're doing that, you can do that wherever you are. You can do that when you're driving. You can do that when you're sitting. You can do that when you're walking. Just rehearse the attributes of God and then realize how different those qualities are than you and I are. God is able. He can do things that I can't do. There is nothing that our God cannot do. So think about God's greatness. Spend time daily rehearsing the attributes of God. Here's the second thing. Listen to those who tell you what you need to hear, not just what you want to hear. I'll acknowledge I'm guilty. Sometimes Kim or someone else will say something to me and I can feel myself getting defensive. But listen, if it comes from a compassionate truth teller, that's exactly the counsel we need to hear. Don't push back, okay? Don't push back. Listen for what you need to hear, not just for what you want to hear. We're going to close this morning. If you're new to fellowship, we always spend the last 20 minutes or so in what we call together time, doing something together as a congregation that involves your input and your involvement, which you'll see in a moment. And so this Sunday, for the last 20 minutes or so here, we've set apart a time just to spend praying together. I love the little acrostic, pray, P-R-A-Y. P is praise, R is repent, A is ask, Y is yield. And so we're just going to kind of walk through that. I'm going to encourage you to participate. If you're asked to, shout something out or share or to sing, then do it. That's part of how we go through the praise, repentance, ask, and yield portion of the service. So let's do that together. Justin.